What do you got, man? Ooh, that was good. That was good. That was clean. Not bad. That's sick. Thank you, man. Appreciate it.
Hey there, my name is Andrew Bristansky and I'm a professional photographer based in Montreal, and today we're going to be talking about the Leica M11. So before I begin, I'd like to thank my friends over at Camtech for supplying the camera here. So a few days ago, Julien messaged me telling me that they got one of these in stock. So I ran by, dropped everything I was doing, and I picked it up and I just went for a walk. It is so nice. Let me just tell you right away, if you're watching this video and you're thinking about getting one, well, this might push you over the edge because it's that good. I am really, really impressed. So let's just start right away with how much fun it is to use. I picked it up, I felt right at home coming from the M10. There are a few differences to note. When you turn it on, that click, that's the shutter opening up, because now this camera is much more like a mirrorless camera than it ever was. I mean, obviously it's mirrorless, but I'm talking about mirrorless in the sense of, you know, Sony's and the SL system. So Leica has definitely taken note from what they have done with the SL system, and they've applied their knowledge to here. Even coming down to the menu system on this thing is extremely similar to that of the SLs, but refined, and I find they implemented it perfectly with the M system. You can even save your coated lenses, your non-coated lenses that is. So if you have, let's say, a rigid cron like this one, well, you could go into the menu, add it as one of your lenses, and then now you have a short list of all the lenses that you own, and you can just pick from the fly. Whereas with the M10, you have to shuffle through the menu every single time you adapt a new lens. It gets very tiring. Now you just have your roster of lenses right there available to you. When you swap them on, you just select them right away and you're good to go. The shortcut button is also really nice because you can click and hold on it and scroll with the wheel and toggle through different menu items. That is also really helpful. And the entire system just feels a little bit more refined than that of the M10 series. The screen is very bright, very contrasty, very responsive. I used it in negative 30 degrees Celsius weather and it just held up. Battery life is fantastic. I used it all day today, and we are at 95%. I don't believe that. I think I charged it at one point, so don't believe that. Otherwise, I love the new battery system. I was definitely an advocate for the bottom plate. When I saw that they got rid of it, I was kind of let down. But now that I've used this camera for the past few days, I'm okay with it. I can live without it, because charging the camera with the USB-C, never having to take the battery out, will definitely help in the long run, because especially as a professional, I do not have to take out the battery and swap it around, put it on a charger while I'm doing a shoot. I can simply just have a battery pack on me, charge it while I'm shooting even. You could just, I used it, you can plug in the USB-C and it'll work while it's charging. It's fantastic. Otherwise, the battery compartment, I do like this system that you push in and out like the SLs and the Qs, but I do wish that the SD card was somewhere else. But I guess for the sake of you know, industrial design, this looks more clean without having a second door for the SD card. Oh well, that's really cool. Otherwise, it feels very similar to the M10. All the buttons, other than the newly placed shortcut button, are exactly the same. They did, for some reason, switch the layout for the buttons. So instead of you know, live view being on top, now it's in the middle and it's called FN instead of live view, and the play button too. So toggling between these two, that was the only thing I had to get used to. Otherwise, virtually the same. And another thing to note is, though the back of these cameras are very similar, they stuck with the dampened scroll wheel of the MPs. My M10 is definitely more clicky, but otherwise, everything's just a little bit more dampened on this guy. There are two things that I noticed while shooting it, that I'll get these out of the way real quick, that kind of caught me off guard, let's say. The startup time is a little slower than my M10s. See? There we go. So if you start it, I think the delay, I counted it, I put a timer, it's about 3 seconds. So I turn it on. There, that's the picture. So I did run into a few instances where I missed a few shots because of that. So I think the trick with this camera will be to leave it on and put it in power saving mode. So this way it might kick in a little quicker. I tried a variety of different tricks to kind of overcome that. One of them was, you know, turning off auto white balance and that kind of stuff, shooting full manual, still hesitated. So that's something to take note of. The other thing was if you're not 100% on the stop, on the shutter speed, it'll just do a long exposure. So I was walking around doing a few street pictures today, and I noticed it only after I took the picture that my camera was just taking like 5-second long exposures. So here we go. Here it is at 1,000th, so it'll take the picture. Perfect. But right in the middle, oh wait, no, there. It's doing a long exposure right now. Really odd. So Leica, please fix that with a firmware update. Otherwise, if you have one of these cameras, just make sure you're definitely in place, because that can happen and it will happen, and I missed a few shots because of that. Otherwise, the other thing also, before I forget, is the shutter release is slightly slower than that of the M10s, like just ever so slightly. Not a big deal. It's still quicker than that of my Sony cameras, so I'm really splitting hairs here, but those are the three, I guess, only drawbacks about this. The rest is, it's just nothing but smooth sailing. This is really, wow, what a fun camera. So here we are outside in the wild with the M11, and we're taking a lot of pictures in the cold. It's like minus 15 degrees. It's a blast. It feels exactly like my M10, just a lot more quiet and a lot of detail. So here, let's take a shot right now of James holding the camera. Beauty. And it's wonderful. The screen is nice and contrasty. Obviously I have the screen protector on it right now. Let's get a picture of these dudes in the range. There we go. You're working with it, baby. There you go. How's that? Got the mean mug. I think I nailed it too. Oh, I didn't. I'm shooting at 36 megapixels. And here we go. I got this lady looking right at me. Medium DNG, which is, I find, the best sweet spot for this camera. Took my photo. She took my photo. Look. She got me back. I love it. I'm underexposing because I'm used to it, and I like to just pull the highlights out. I'm not 100% used to this camera, so that's kind of why I'm doing it. And we're also just going to test out the dynamic range by underexposing it and pulling it out in post, pulling out the shadows. I haven't really noticed a huge jump or a huge difference from my M10, but I do notice that the highlights do retain a lot more detail just on the screen. So when I look at it at home, I'll verify that for sure. But so far, I mean, here's a good example. There we go. Let's put it at 64 and 1/1000th at f8. Wow, holy mackerel. That's at medium, and I'm gonna do it on large, and I'll be able to pull this up on the screen probably when I'm home. So let's do that right now. Got some birds flying. Beautiful. Oh my God, so much detail. So let's do it one more time. I'm gonna properly expose it now. 500th of a second, 64. Large DNG, once. And now, medium DNG. The screen's a little hesitant right now because it's freezing. All right, and we'll check these out at home. Oh, it's cold. My fingers are cold. The camera's made of brass. I feel like this is maybe where the aluminum one would have the upper hand, is your fingers won't be frozen if you do shoot it in these.
Oh, the silver one is brass.
The silver one's brass.
Oh, and the black one's aluminum.
The black one's aluminum.
Ah.
Yeah. So this is this feels exactly like my M10 in the cold, and that is to say it's freezing. Oh my God. Oh, I love it. Yeah. I've heavily underexposed that, but I got her smiling at me, and I missed the focus. ISO 64. I think it's a little too dark for 64 now.
unless you open her up to one f2, but then it's gonna be hard to focus.
I'm at f4, 800, 1/500. Another thing that I've noticed so far with this is shooting it at even at 1/500th of a second. I'm noticing that I get some image shake. Some I mean, when I zoom in at it, like at a pixel level. Someone else mentioned that to me before I left today, and I notice it now very often. Shutter speeds that I would normally shoot at comfortably with the M10, I'm now shooting at a lot faster, 2 times quicker in fact. I cannot do the 1 over.
Oh wow.
Oh yeah, this is the source of sex that burnt down. So I've noticed that shooting at 1 over your shutter, your shutter speed 1 over your focal length does not apply to this. You actually have to do almost 2 times, if not even a little faster than that, because stopping time with this camera is a lot harder than with my M10 because there's so much more detail to resolve, and you just notice the shutter shake. You notice the camera shakes so much more. Every little movement is just exaggerated. Anyway.
So walking around with this camera and doing street photography, I really got to experience this camera in a high-paced environment. I find that's the best way to really immerse yourself in a camera system, is just to take it out right away after knowing a bit about it, obviously. But I came from the M10 and I just dove right into this camera, and I went for a walk and I did some street photography, and I just took it everywhere with me to really get a feel for how it really would behave in a daily environment, which is, you know, how I treat my M's in general. And I was very rewarded by it, but I also got to see, you know, how this camera behaves. And it was really a learning curve at first, because I did notice right away that my usual shooting style, which is with the 24 megapixel sensor, I usually shoot 1 over the focal length that I have, roughly. So let's say if it's a 50 millimeter, I'll shoot at 1 over 1/60th of a second. And then if it's a 35, I'll usually keep it around 1/60th. Maybe if I'm feeling, you know, risky, I'll do 1/45th, but I like to keep it generally around 1/60th of a second. But with this guy at 60 megapixels and even at 36, I noticed that my user input was coming out into the sensor. So I saw a lot of people talking about how this camera should have a image stabilized body, and I thought, you know, I never needed one with the M10. Why would I now with the 60 megapixels? Because I already felt like this M10 was plenty sharp. I noticed it with the 60 megapixels. There is a bit of camera shake at, you know, and it's very noticeable because the detail is always there. I find, like, I'm looking at my images on a 5K screen and I see it at face value very often, and I'm noticing camera shake that I had never noticed before with this camera. So even shooting street photography, where I would normally shoot 1/500th of a second very comfortably, now I was going at 1/1000th, even 1/2000th of a second, just to keep things kind of steady, because I noticed it. The movement is much more obvious when you can look at them in such a larger scale. So it's definitely something to take into account with this camera, but you don't have to feel shy about boosting the ISO or increasing the shutter speed, because this thing can take it. The sensor is so forgiving. It has so much shadow recovery, such good high ISO performance as well, that you can push it a little higher and it'll reward you. So something to take note of, because I noticed that really early on, that I have to actually stop this thing down in shutter speed just to make sure that I can get steady shots. And I kind of felt like it was taunting me because whenever I was sure I got the shot steady at 1/60th of a second, I didn't get it. So definitely something to take into account. But one thing I also really appreciated about using a chrome digital M body, because normally I'm sticking with my black chrome, the chrome definitely drew people's eyes in a little bit more, and it definitely changed my approach to street photography, because now they see it. The silent shutter definitely helped with them not knowing when I was taking a picture. So people would tend to look at the camera a lot more, I noticed, versus my black M10. And it opened up a conversation a lot of the time. So I would look at someone, they look at the camera, and, you know, I'm very excited about the camera, so it definitely gave me a little bit less of a stage fright to come up to them. And I just said, hey, can I take your picture? And even through windows of a store or whatever, I still looked at them, they looked at me, and I smiled and I took the picture, and it worked. I'm very happy, you know, with the added confidence of them looking right back at you and them thinking this is an analog camera, because I had it a few times where people asked me if this was a film camera, and I'm like, well, no. And it really made for a very fun and engaging experience. I felt like I was smiling the entire time. Obviously I was, this is just such an incredible camera, but the experience, the feedback I had from my subjects was just so welcoming. I was very happy with it. So I just walked around and asked people for the pictures, and it worked, and I'm very happy. And the skin tones that this thing reproduces is just so good. So now let's talk about the image performance, because that's what we want to experience here. This is why we're trading up from M10s primarily. It's for those 60 megapixels. This sensor is so refined. It is incredible. The resolution, the juice it sucks out from your lenses. And I tried a few of my vintage lenses on this thing, and I was in awe, really. So one really cool feature now that Leica has gone pretty much more and more digital, it's embracing its identity, because now the shutter blades are entirely black. They're not grayscale like they are with the M10s and all the digital M's that came before. Now the camera does away with this archaic this light meter here that like reads the light hitting the curtains here and gets the reading for its metering. It does it entirely on the sensor. So when you turn it on, part of the delay that is the shutter opening up. That sounds so much louder without a lens on. And there's your image sensor. So let me tell you, yes, you're asking yourself, crap, the sensor's always exposed. Much like these Sony cameras and all the other mirrorless cameras, there was already a speck of dust that I had to blow off with a rocket blower. So I think if you're a Leica store, get ready. You're gonna have a lot of Leica M11s coming in for sensor cleanings more often. But if that's the price to pay for having such a good sensor and such good metering, so be it, because the camera has been spot on every single shot. And I've gotten so used to with the center weight metering of the M10 that I just immediately disregarded, you know, any potential for improvement. When I tried this camera out, I was just shooting it full manual the entire time I had it. Started at ISO 64 and stayed around ISO 200 for most of my street photography. But just before I went for an evening walk to test out the low light performance, and I said, let's give it a chance. Let's try some auto exposure. Wow. Fantastic. Not only are the colors always perfect as well, by the way. You look at the screen, you take a picture, and whatever you see on the screen is definitely, if it's not off by a couple degrees, it's usually spot on, and you're looking at pretty much what real life looks like on the screen. Whereas with my M10, especially at low light, everything gets cartoonish. The yellows are completely out of control. The profile is a little bit more archaic than that of the M10s, the M11. I mean, the M11 is just so refined. The color profile and the color science of it is so good. You get all the juicy saturation and those beautiful colors that you get normally from your SLs or your M's. The M11 masters it. This is the best sensor I've ever used when using M lenses. It is phenomenal. The image quality feels medium format. The resolution is outstanding. The gradation as well is really something else. The images just have such depth to them. Each color, it has its own color. With the M10, I was used to having my greens and yellows overlap, and you know, the profile, especially, it screwed around with the sensor a bit too much, I find. You know, if you applied the Leica M10 profile to like a M10 image, and you're coming from, let's say, an Adobe color image, and you already edited for it, you'll see like all the colors are out of whack. Not anymore with the M11. You simply plug in the profile and bang, your image just has an extra 10% juicy goodness, you know. Beautiful. This really is what it's all about. This is the ultimate M. I just can't get over how fun it is and how rewarding the images are. One thing I did notice is that the files straight out of the camera from the M11 appear to be a little bit more flat, in the sense that the colors are less saturated than those coming out of my M10. And I also had to slide the shadow recovery down a bit. So I found that there was actually a bit too much processing out of the camera. So yes, the images are a little bit more dynamic, but I find that they have just a bit too much shadow detail for my liking. So it's one thing to take into account because your images can appear a little bit too flat or processed straight out of the camera. 60 megapixels, the fact that it's backlit and the fact that now the pixels are just that much closer to the front of the sensor, the vignetting is almost completely remedied with most of my lenses. My 50 Summilux just looks that much better. It reminds me a lot of what I found in the SL2, but now this feels even better. The colors are warmer and your vignette is virtually gone and the sharpness is just phenomenal. My images definitely feel much more punchy. I mean, I'm sure the 60 megapixels has something to do with that, but the images are just so gorgeous. They're cinematic, they're beautiful, there's such a gorgeous tonality to your images right out of the box with the M11 profile. And the colors definitely add a little bit more work to the images because now you have all of that real estate to work with. So it can be a little intimidating. I'm still getting used to the color workflow, I'll be honest, because with the M10 it was pretty simple. You know, what you got is what you got. You can play with it a bit, but with the M11, it reminds me really much of shooting with like an A7R4, A7R3, A7R2, you know, just all of that detail that you can play with. It's all there. This is really, really something else. And back, before I even forget the SL2, because when I tried out the SL2, I found that that was really the ultimate way to experience your M lenses because it just was such a refined sensor. I dare say this is better than the SL sensor. And you know what, it probably is because I love the colors coming out of this. The SL2, I found the colors a little bit more green and blue compared to this one. It's literally like comparing Fujifilm to Kodak. That's what it kind of felt like. If the SL2 felt a little bit more Fuji and this felt a little bit more Kodak. And that's really what this is. It's just so freaking gorgeous. So when you're shooting at 60 megapixels, you've got a ton of detail and you have that kind of endless feeling to your images because there's no anti-aliasing filter on it. So you just hit the pixel and that's it. But when you go to the 36 megapixel option, then you see that the end of the image is kind of more pronounced. It's kind of like shooting you know, something with an anti-aliasing filter, I mean. So there's no moire, which is cool, but it's missing that oomph, you know, that kind of like infinite feeling that you have to the images, because the M10 does feel like that. When you zoom into the images, it just kind of feels like you can keep going, and then next thing you know, you've struck pixels. That's what it feels like at 60 megapixels, but at 36 and 18, it doesn't have that bite, but the images are clean. They're very glassy. There's very little digital noise anywhere. Then when you shoot at 36 megapixels, you get that extra stop of dynamic range that they keep talking about. It's there. I have never used, other than, you know, a Fujifilm 100, a GFX 100. I've never seen files like this, and that's where I think someone mentioned in one of the posts I made that the sensor on this guy is a derivative of the 100 megapixel one, and I definitely believe it because it does remind me of that. And the files are so just so full. Sorry, my rabbit is chewing on his cage. Oh my goodness. Anyway, so that extra stop of dynamic range is there. I noticed it. I did a few comparisons. One of them was shooting my friend James when we went out testing the cameras together. The highlights have just a bit more depth. The highlights are retained more when you shoot at 36 megapixels versus the 60 megapixel option. So if you do want more dynamic range, it's not like a humongous amount of detail that you're missing out on when you shoot 60 megapixels, but it is there, and I didn't really notice a humongous difference at face value when I was toggling through my images between 36 and 60. I usually have to look at the dimension of the image in the info bar on my in my Lightroom. So it's to say that I think this camera is best shot at 36 megapixels because you get all of the juice that you can get with regards to dynamic range, and you're gonna want that if you do like to edit your images a lot. So the shadow recovery, the highlight recovery is very good, though I did notice throughout the day that I was more inclined to underexpose, because like all digital cameras, you will clip your highlights and lose the detail. It'll happen with anything like the sun or the sun reflecting on a sidewalk or something like that. Just be wary. But you can kind of screw these images up pretty badly, and you can recover them in post. It's really, really, really rewarding. One of the features that I was very curious to try about this camera when I got it was the silent shutter feature, because when you do shoot this camera at anything above 1/4000th of a second, you can have it switch into the electronic shutter, and you can go up to 1/16,000th of a second, which is like utterly insanely fast. But I tried it and I turned it off right away because you do get rolling shutter. So if you do take pictures of fast-paced moving environments or whatever, you will see some jello in your shots. So be wary of that. And then also the silent shutter will show some banding in indoor artificial lighting. So make sure that you shoot the camera at 1/60th of a second or slower if it's indoors with the electronic shutter, just to avoid that banding, because I think the sensor readout on this is about 1/60th of a second. Then at high speeds, if you do switch into the electronic shutter, just make sure that your subjects aren't moving too fast, because you will see that the sensor readout is going to come into play there and you're going to see some jello artifacts. So be wary of that. When it comes down to the form factor, the lenses that you can put on it, this is a really good sale. Like the M10 is definitely a fantastic camera in its own right, and it's gonna, definitely have its place in Leica camera history, but this is the future. And I feel like it's definitely paving the way for the future of the M line. And we're gonna see where this is gonna go in the next 5 years, because I'm a little curious, because now that they got rid of that archaic, metering system, now you can adapt old lenses that you couldn't too, like, the super angulons. You can collapse lenses into this thing. You can even mount dual range summicrons, whereas with the M, the digital M's before, you were always a little wary of that. Well, I think the next step, because of how well implemented the live view is, and the fact that the sensor is always exposed and always metering and always on, hitting live view now is no longer a delay. It's immediate. It's always on. I have a gut feeling that we're going to see a potential, hybrid viewfinder at one point, because that definitely feels like where this is headed. And this definitely feels like the next step in Leica hierarchy towards, its digital embrace. The SL system can coexist, and I'm very curious to see where they take this system from here on out. But right now we have this incredible M11, and I'm going to tell you, I'm really, really impressed. The files are just such a joy. They're so refreshing. It's definitely taken and it's elevated the M10 experience to the next level. And if you are looking to upgrade, or you're just looking at this camera and trying to get a little bit more knowledge about it, I can tell you right away that it delivers. The shortcomings that the M10 had, which were mainly its low light performance and its colors at low lights, are now remedied by this, and the detail that this thing reproduces is just phenomenal. The M11, the files are just so freaking nice, and I love the ability to control the resolution, because when you're doing weddings or you're doing street photography, or sometimes you just don't feel like chewing up your hard drive with all the space that these files consume, you could just toggle down and shoot lower and it's fine. You're not losing anything. In fact, you're gaining something. So it really doesn't feel like you're losing out when you're reducing the image quality. It actually kind of rewards you with, more dynamic range. So I'll take that. I'll take that trade over. And yeah, I'm very happy with this thing. And I didn't expect, to be honest with you, trying this camera, I really didn't expect to come out of this as tempted to buy it as I am now. I'll tell you that. It sells really well. It really puts a lot on the table, and I am very, very impressed. It was nice to have all my questions answered by using it, and I got to experience it as I would shoot it, and it really just held up the entire time. It really feels like the next M, and that's what it is. So thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'd love to know your thoughts about the M11 in the comments below. Are you gonna get one? Are you tempted by one? Are you gonna get a poster of one of these and put it on your wall? Let me know. Thanks for watching. Bye. Why Leica? What's going on here? You have the chrome body cap, the chrome hot shoe covers. Why did you go back to the plastic ones? Come on, that was my gripe with the M10. Give me the chrome.